Russel Delroy has been picking and packing avocados in Western Australia's southwest since before they were fashionable. And like so many producers, COVID-19 has contributed to some of the toughest conditions he's seen.
The last 2 years we're moving into oversupply and very difficult economic returns, and on top of that we've had all the complications of labour supply, sourcing labour supply to be able to harvest and process our crops has just been incredibly difficult.
The oversupply is putting downward pressure on prices.
We've seen a lot of avocados selling for $1 a piece in the last 3, 4, 5 months. At that price, growers are actually losing money. We need to see prices retail at $1.50. Growers are about break even. At $2 a piece, we're making quite reasonable profits.
At the same time, the cost of labour, which increasingly is being brought in from the Pacific, has skyrocketed.
This year we've spent nearly $170,000 on hotel quarantine alone without flights.
Due to COVID-19, backpacker numbers in Australia have shrunk from about 140,000 to just 30,000. But Russell says it's not all bad news. He says the shift to seasonal Pacific workers has boosted productivity.
It's become increasingly difficult to manage the high turnover of backpacker labour. They are often very good workers, but often they're only here for 4 weeks, and then management has to go and rehire and retrain somebody for a specific job. The great thing about the seasonal worker program is we train them at the beginning of the season. They're here for the full 6 or 9 months. They go home, and the same people will return the following year. Have you got kids at home?
This is 43-year-old Tongan national Maliani Moniati's first stint in Australia. Her goal is to pay off a loan and help her family back home.
I'll be here for 9 months, and what I'll be earning here will be the double with what I have in Tonga.
In 2020, the WA government launched an advertising campaign aimed at attracting city people to take up jobs in the regions.
Right now, there's a range of short and long-term jobs.
Through it, Russel Delroy employed several long-term unemployed, but without success.
Typically they lasted 3 or 4 days and found the work was rather difficult and onerous. A lot of it is mental health, and quite a significant amount of it was drug-related. That's just a check weigh that checks each one is a minimum 1 kilo.
He's not ready to show the world yet, but as another safeguard against a challenging labour market, Russell has been investing in robotic packing machines and eventually plans to use robotic pickers.
We anticipate once that site's up and running, we'll remove about 80% of the labour that we're currently utilising at this site.
But back to the question about why more Australians aren't taking up jobs on farms, he offers this food for thought.
You know, currently in Western Australia, we've got a booming economy and we've got unemployment under 5%. So there's actually relatively little unemployment. The opportunities in Australia for young people in all sorts of professions and more highly skilled jobs, there's so many opportunities. You know, the idea of packing avocados in a tray 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week is probably not overly appealing.
In the nearby town of Manjimup, Ed Fallons is housing seasonal workers from Vanuatu in what's usually backpacker accommodation. He hopes COVID-19 helps Australians place a higher value on the contribution backpackers have made to our economy.
The old saying of Australia rode on the sheep's back is now they've ridden on the backpacker's back. They've been the backbone for the last 20 years and they've done a magnificent job.
So how, as a nation, did we get to a point where we rely so heavily on overseas labour?
I don't think it's anything new. We've had pretty tight labour markets since white settlement. Of course, we had convicts, and then in the 19th century we had things like blackbirding with Kanakas from the Pacific Islands. We also had blackbirding in the pearling industry. But in terms of legal employment from other places, certainly we had Chinese people before the White Australian policy, we've had Afghans, and then post-World War II, it was all about population, or populate or perish.
How are these jobs being filled overseas?
Exactly the same. People are moving around the world seeking jobs in more lucrative markets. Romanians, Slovaks are working in Ireland, in the UK, in France. Chinese, Filipino people are working in other places, Mexicans into the US, into Canada. So it's a vast circular economy. It's an insecure economy with quite often difficult industrial relations coverage. So it's really, the less fortunate working for the more fortunate.
Why is it that Australians don't want to come out and do these jobs in the regions?
Increasingly, and really it's been since the mid-1980s, we've had a depopulation trend out of regional, rural and remote communities into cities. We've got a vast number of people living with their parents for much longer than perhaps when I was a teenager. And it's actually quite difficult to find places to live while you're working in a regional, rural community. There's not the accommodation. Sometimes rents are very high. Sometimes farmers do provide accommodation, but it's probably not premium. So a young person living in the city who might be on an extended university holiday or school holidays, they're going to be leaving perhaps a job market that's probably quite lucrative in the city. They're living at home. If they're renting in the city, there's a very slim chance that they can be lured out for relatively short periods of time.
Several weeks ago, the federal government announced a new agricultural visa, saying it would add to the already highly successful Pacific labour and seasonal worker schemes, adding that they were now the government's primary method of filling agricultural labour shortages.
The Agriculture Minister says the new Ag Visa will include a pathway to permanent residency for skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled agricultural workers. It will target Southeast Asian nations, but crucially, he says it will remain separate from the Pacific labour schemes. Workers from those countries won't be offered permanent residency.
What's happening in the Pacific, we don't want to take away that precious human capital from the Pacific. They need their men and women there to be able to build their nations.
Australia's backpacker scheme has in some cases seen backpackers exploited, harassed and assaulted. There's a popular Instagram hashtag, 88 Days a Slave, where backpackers vent their frustrations at having to work 88 days on farms for an extension of their working holiday visas. Under the recently signed UK-Australia Free Trade Agreement, British backpackers will no longer have to complete the 88 days. But the government isn't counting on a resurgence in backpackers from other countries once COVID-19 restrictions lift.
They weren't always as reliable, but they played a very important role. But this is an important time for us to use this to make a structural change in the workforce in this country and make sure that those that are working there want to be part of our regional communities. This is the exciting thing about the next generation of migrants coming to regional Australia. We want to make them citizens. We want them to come to Australia and get permanent residency and be part of these small country towns, make up the fabric of these small country towns, not just pass by.
Back in Donnybrook, Russel Delroy says he would choose seasonal workers from the Pacific and East Timor as his preferred labour source.
They've worked very well for us, and from a business point of view, it's good to see that we're able to make a real difference to their lives as well.
As the finer details of the government's agriculture visa are worked out, one thing that's abundantly clear is the face of Australian agricultural workers is once again changing.